Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Ratio Christi event for this week. Who is Ratio Christi? Well, we are a apologetics student ministry where we equip Christian students to be able to give reasons why they're following Jesus Christ as their Lord and their Savior. And we usually meet weekly, but ever since the lockdown, we moved onto this platform, which is why we started our YouTube channel, and you can also visit our website at www.ratiochristi.co.za. And then I also just want to encourage you to please subscribe to our YouTube channel. We have weekly events here, and until things aren't back to normal, we will keep on having weekly events on this platform. So please subscribe. And then I would also just encourage anyone who are willing to donate to our ministry. We would really appreciate that. We are a students ministry, which means that we are dependent on donations. So if you are able to, please take the liberty to do so. You can also find the link for the website and the donation page in the description of this video. So thank you. If you're able to do that, we would very much appreciate that. Now, I just quickly want to say thank you for the man behind the scenes, Gior. He has been helping us so much with our online ministry. Gior, thank you very much for running around behind the scenes to make this possible as well. And then just let me just see here. Oh yeah, just quickly an announcement on next week. Next week we have a speaker. His name is John Nerness. He is from the US, and he recently finished his PhD thesis. Well, I'm not sure if it's formally done and all that stuff. I guess there's still some final things that needs to get done. But he studied at the theological faculty at the Potchefstroom campus, which means that he worked on his PhD thesis at a South African university. But in any case, he's going to be joining us next week with the topic of the introduction to giving theological explanations. Now, he's very serious about giving theological explanations for different things that we observe in culture and different phenomena that we see around us. And so he's going to give an introduction to giving these kinds of theological explanations to things. So that's next week. And now for tonight, we have the topic of Satanism. And joining me tonight is Professor Richard Howe. Richard, it is so nice to see you. It's good to talk to you again. Welcome. And thank you so much for taking some time and joining us this evening.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
All right, now let me just quickly tell you a couple of things about Professor Richard. Professor Richard Howe is a writer as well as a public speaker and debater in churches, conferences, and university campuses on issues concerning Christian apologetics and philosophy. He is Professor Emeritus of Philosophy and Apologetics at Southern Evangelical Seminary in Charlotte, North Carolina, where he still teaches part-time. In fact, he's going to be teaching later this evening as well. Now, Richard is a good friend of Ratio Christi South Africa. He has joined us in the past together with his wife, Rebecca, multiple times, helping us out here with our efforts and speaking on campuses around our country. So it's very nice to have Richard with us this evening, especially on this topic. He has spent a lot of time researching Satanism. And so we're really looking forward to listening to you, Richard. So thanks again. And I'm going to give it over to you now.
Thanks, Danielle. I appreciate it. I tell people my formal training academically is in philosophy. I've got a master's and a PhD in philosophy from two different, what we would call state universities, as opposed to, say, private universities in the U.S. But outside of my formal studies in philosophy, probably the area that I have focused on the most over the years, off and on, is the occult, broadly considered the occult. And I want to nest tonight's topic in that broader context of the occult, but we'll focus on specifically modern Satanism. So let me share a screen with you, and just a few PowerPoint slides that I want to let you look at. You know, when it comes to these controversial kinds of talks, there's always the desire to bring the evidence, or rather bring facts to the equation, the truth about it, because we're hopefully all interested in the truth. There may be some here tonight that are listening to me who might not be Christian, and maybe even are sympathetic to or have adopted the philosophy of Satanism. And I hope there are some here tonight. You're welcome, and I hope we can have a productive dialogue. The problem with facts sometimes is that I might state, well, the existence of God is a fact. That doesn't settle the question of whether God exists, however, because an atheist is going to say, well, it's a fact that God doesn't exist. So now we both stated at least what we think are facts. Now the onus is for all of us to sort of give our arguments and evidence. So there may be a few things that I say tonight that obviously are born out of my Christian faith in terms of my beliefs, that deserve to be unpacked and defended a lot more than we can do in 40 minutes or so, or even in a Q&A. So, but as we go along, write down comments or questions that you have and follow the protocols that the tech people and the leadership have set up, and maybe we can deal with some of those questions, and I'll do the best I can. We've titled this, The Truth Behind Modern Satanism. I want to invite you to be able to get a slide deck, a PDF file of a slide deck of the presentation you're going to see. You want to do that for two reasons. One, many of the slides that are in the presentation in its entirety are hidden for the sake of time. And also, they're a little oblique from the main topic for tonight. But also, if I bring up a citation, let's say, and it may come and go on the screen too quickly, you go, what page was that on in the Satanic Bible, for example? Then you'll want to get the slide deck, and that way you can find the slide, find the citation, and chase down the page number to make sure that I've either quoted it correctly, or maybe more importantly, I haven't quoted something out of context and maybe construing something to mean something that it doesn't necessarily mean. All right, so to get that slide deck, you'll want to go to my real cheesy website. So I always have to be careful with who's in the audience of all these web developers. So I've got this real static, prosaic website here, and you go to richardghowe.com. So I tell people in a moment of humility, I bought and named an internet domain after myself because I was just feeling so humble when I did that. So if you go to richardghowe.com, it'll bring you to this first page. What you can see there is it won't be blinking when you look at it, but you go to the resources tab at the top. It'll give you 4 choices. If I say anything tonight about, I've got a paper on my website, then you'll want to click on the papers icon there, and it'll take you to a page. There are papers I've written, papers other people have written that you can download, links to things on the internet having to do with Bible, theology, philosophy, apologetics. Same thing with multimedia. If I say, hey, I've got an MP3, got an MP4 that you can download or linked, some that I've done, other people have done, then click on the multimedia icon there. My church is Midway Community Church, so I always bring greetings from the saints at Midway Community Church in Alpharetta, Georgia, USA. So I don't know that I'll mention anything, but I've done studies at my church, and I've put things up there for them to have. But the one that's relevant for the topic at hand, you go to PowerPoint PDF slide decks, and it'll just take you to a page. It's basically an alphabetized listing of pretty much all the presentations that I do for the courses that I teach, including the one you'll see tonight as part of a course that I teach on a subject titled New Religious Movements, where we deal with religions primarily in the U.S. that have come about in prominence, at least in the late 19th and early 20th century. So if you scroll down, you'll see the heading there, Christian Perspective on the Occult. And the one obviously for us there is the extreme occultism, Satanism. And I want you to understand what I mean by that qualifier, extreme. All right. I don't mean anything pejorative like Satanist or real extremist in some unpleasant kind of way. You'll see what I mean by that here in due course. If you want more or less a written version of some of the stuff I'm going to say tonight, then I wrote a cover story for the Christian Research Journal called Satanism, A Taste for the Dark Side, which I didn't title, but I like the title and I like the cover there. But same thing, you go to richardghowe.com and go to papers and just scroll down and you can find Satanism, A Taste for the Dark Side. And it's basically an article, if you will, condensed for a Christian journal. All right, so you're welcome to that. Now, I mentioned this nesting Satanism in a broader context of the occult. And in my course, we go into details of all this. But here's how I catalog our study of the occult as I teach it at the seminary. Extreme occultism, Satanism. What I mean by extreme here is not extreme in the sense that they're unruly or cads or whatever. What I mean is there's a perspective, an ideological perspective, a philosophical spectrum, if you will, that you can go from one end of the spectrum to the other. Sort of like in philosophy, we would call Plato an extreme realist as opposed to moderate realism or scholastic realism or nominalism or other things. So it's not a pejorative term. It just means they're sort of the full bore of the philosophy of the occult, whatever that means, which we'll say something about here in due course. So just so you can see how I nest this, then moderate occultism would be witchcraft, which, by the way, you can also go to another article in the same journal, different edition, called Modern Witchcraft. It May Not Be What You Think, because what I try to do there is disabuse Christians of a lot of the misunderstandings I think they have of the occult in general and witchcraft in particular. In fact, I try to do a similar thing in the Satanism to try to disabuse particularly Christians of what I think are misunderstandings they have, not only of Satanism as a philosophy and an ideology and a religion, but also Satanists as individual human beings who have embraced either Satanism or witchcraft. I think there's a lot of misunderstandings on our part as Christians especially, and I think those misunderstandings create impediments to productive relationship and dialogue. So you go to richardghowe.com, the same website there. And then mainstream occultism, this is the New Age movement. And then surprisingly to some people, Christian occultism, which is the Word of Faith movement. So the thing to pick out here, and I'll make some specific comments as we go along, but broadly my argument is that whether it's Satanism, witchcraft, New Age, or the Word of Faith movement, there are some basic views about the nature of reality that they share in common. They're sort of a similar worldview. Now, as a Christian, my criteria of testing, 1 Thessalonians 5:21 and 22 tell us to test all things, hold fast what is good, abstain from every form of evil. Obviously, all of those would have to be unpacked. What do you mean by test? What do you mean by good? What do you mean by evil? Obviously, those deserve to be unpacked. And I think one of the criterion that I use and that Christians ought to use is sound reason. Well, what do you mean by sound reason, right? You can unpack all of these. And also, not surprisingly, as a Christian, the scripture. Now, if you're not a Christian, however, then you're not going to be particularly impressed with what the Bible might say about something any more than you might be impressed about what any other book that's sacred to a certain religion is going to say. So I'm going to try to confine my analyses for our purposes in a way that comports more with sound reason in general, that humans can dispute and discuss because we're human, irrespective of whether we're Christian or whether we're Satanist or anything else. So when we talk about Satanism, there are, at least in the United States, different types of Satanism. And understandably, but maybe I should ask your indulgence, if not forgiveness, a lot of my perspective is molded by my experience as an American. But I don't think that's irrelevant, because I think American kind of things sometimes impact to greater or lesser extent other countries in the world, because it's such a global community now, especially through the internet. So one book that you might find interesting is Arthur Lyons, who was an investigative journalist who actually joined the Church of Satan and wrote a book called Satan Wants You, The Cult of Devil Worship in America. So I like Arthur Lyons. In fact, I like the sort of outline he gives of cataloging satanic groups in America. And I use that cataloging in my analysis. We're not going to go through the catalog except to see where Satanism, our topic tonight, fits into that. But my cataloging is basically this: religious Satanists, self-styled Satanists, and then satanic cults. Now, I want to say a few words about this very last one at the very end, if we have time, if I manage the clock accurately enough. The reason is because the Church of Satan in South Africa actually brings up an issue in their constitution that's entirely relevant to that third category. So if I don't get back to it with details, I just want to say something here at the front end in the interest of maybe building some bridges between the Christian community and the Satanist community, especially in South Africa. Because they say in their constitution, which I got off their Facebook page, specifically their mission, Satan to us is a symbol of pride, freedom, and individualism, and it serves as a projection of our highest potential. Our ultimate mission is to educate the public to what legitimate Satanism is, and also, more importantly, to address the misconceptions that exist in South Africa as a result of the satanic panic. So note that if we get back to it. But let me just say here at the front end, without details, that I think this is a very fair and legitimate concern of South African Satanists, in fact, of any Satanist in the world. The satanic panic was primarily the decade of the 80s in the United States, where there were a proliferation of accusations of ritual child abuse, clandestine quasi-political organizations infiltrating churches and government agencies to propagate the worldview of the occult. And some of the stories get salacious and sordid, and it just spread like wildfire through the decade. People were on TV, police were talking about it, ex-Satanists were coming out of the woodwork, and here's what we used to do. In my judgment, I think for the most part, those things that were being said during that decade are just not true. With a little bit of qualification that I might get to, or maybe you can ask me about that. But let me just go on record to say I think this is a legitimate concern that South African Satanists have. And if you're a Christian listening to me, I would urge you to seriously re-examine the evidence and not try to build your case against Satanism based on these salacious stories about somebody who was a breeder who would have children so they could use them to sacrifice and these kind of things, which is inconsistent with what at least Anton LaVey teaches in his Satanic Bible. All right. So if I don't say anything else about it, I concur with the Satanist Constitution in this regard. So besides that, and besides what we may go on to say during the Q&A, probably, if that, about the satanic cults and the satanic panic, let me focus now on religious Satanism. The largest religious Satanist group has been for many decades in the United States, the Church of Satan. But you should know that it's not the only Church of Satan, if you will, in the U.S. Its rival, and some people would argue it's larger, and this is a lot of competition, a lot of animus that I've read over the years between the followers of each of these groups, is the Temple of Set. The Temple of Set, which I won't say anything else about unless someone has a question about it beyond just these few words. There's Anton LaVey on the right, about whom I'll say more in a moment. The man on the left is Michael Aquino, who basically was his right-hand man and second in command, so to speak, who eventually they had an ideological rift. It's sort of the satanic equivalent to the Protestant Reformation, if you will. They sort of split over some ideas, and Aquino started his own group. Well, you can't call your group, the Reorganized Church of Satan. That sounds silly, doesn't it? At least it sounds silly to an American ear, because there's so many reorganized types of Christian churches. So he had to pick the better analog from another ancient mythology rather than Hebrew mindset. He picked it from the Egyptian mindset, who was the god Set, who's the rough equivalent to Satan or the adversary in Hebrew thinking. So there's Michael on the left with his wife Lilith that founded it. There he is today with them, still alive, still working the Temple of Set. Here's an interesting photo. He is a decorated retired lieutenant colonel from the United States Army. So that's all I want to say about Temple of Set, unless somebody has a question about it. So the Church of Satan was founded by Anton LaVey. There he is. This is the back of the Satanic Bible. But I want to just dispel any rumors that might already be seemingly coming to the surface here as we go along. All right, so this is pretty self-explanatory. I'm just saying, all right? I don't know. You might be wondering, okay, wait a minute. I don't know if we can trust this guy or not. He looks like Anton LaVey. Maybe he's one of these satanic panic guys that is infiltrated and is cajoled away to talk about Satanism stuff. So, so Norm Geisler, my mentor in theology, used to always introduce me as the faculty member who looks like Anton LaVey. Okay, so I'll just let you decide. So there he is, as probably most people. Here he is on Look magazine, which back in the 60s was a popular magazine. I actually have that magazine here, all in protective paper there. This is a commentary on the fact that when the Church of Satan started in the late 60s in the U.S., it quickly garnered a lot of cultural attention. It became very chic in Hollywood to be associated with Anton LaVey and the Church of Satan. In fact, the picture you saw just a moment ago, the gentleman in the middle was Sammy Davis Jr., who was a highly loved celebrity in movies and entertainment and such. There are also false pictures that circulated the internet. And these usually happen in America in the cycle of major political campaigns. So when John Kerry on the right was supposedly running for president or vying for a slot in the run, then somebody posted this picture where they have him with Anton LaVey in order to cast aspersions on his character. You didn't have to say anything to most people. You just go, oh, he hung around Anton LaVey. He must be a cad, a scoundrel. This is a false picture. In fact, what you can see is this picture with Marilyn Manson. If you flip it, you'll notice that it's exactly the same picture of Anton LaVey, just cropped. And the picture of John Kerry, you can actually see, comes from another picture here. Let me show you. This was a public children's fundraising event he was at, raising funds for children's childhood disease. And someone cropped that picture to put them together. There's Anton with hair. I don't have a picture of me with hair. I have to dig one of those up if you're curious what that looks like. There he is with Jane Mansfield, a Hollywood starlet who had a tragic death. Here he is from his teenage and early young adult years. You can see the sort of fascination he had with film noir motif, the 1940s, American 40s, the gangster, the zoot suit, and these kind of things. He's the author of the Satanic Bible. Here's my very own Satanic Bible here. It's well worn. I've had it for decades. I actually have 2 copies of the Satanic Bible. The sequel is Satanic Rituals. Here's my Satanic Rituals there. I have pretty much everything that I know that he's written there. He wrote The Satanic Witch, The Devil's Notebook, and then posthumously published Satan Speaks. You can get biographies, Blanche Barton's biography, which I have, and also The Secret Life of the Satanist, which I also have. Now, what is LaVey's view? For all the centuries of shouting down the devil has received, he has never shouted back at his detractors. He has remained the gentleman at all times, while those he supports rant and rave. He has shown himself to be a model of deportment, but now he feels it is time to shout back. He has decided it is finally time to receive his due. So LaVey saw himself as, I'm going to be that person that speaks in the name of the, quote, devil. But let me give you a profile of what the Satanic Bible teaches and what Anton LaVey himself believed. And some of this may be surprising. First of all, and I'm not necessarily speaking for all Satanists in the world, or even for all Satanists that may be listening to me right now. This is just what I understand him and his Satanic Bible to be teaching, and what his church has taught. First of all, it's atheistic. So Satanism denies the existence of God and the devil. So Arthur Lyons subtitled The Cult of Devil Worship in America. I think Arthur Lyons knew that wasn't technically true. It was just sort of what we now call clickbait. He was being deliberately incendiary just to get people to pick up the book because it was salacious. It was during the Satanic Panic. Yeah, I want to learn about these devil worshipers. He doesn't even believe in the devil. He believes in himself, as we'll see in a moment. That's where the focus is going to lie. So the question obviously presents itself, well, why then do you call yourself a Satanist if you don't even believe Satan exists? Well, there's an answer to that. So Satanism is a religion of the flesh, the mundane, that is the earthly, the carnal, which is just a Greek word for flesh, all of which are ruled by Satan, the personification of the left-hand path. In the occult, you have the left-hand path and the right-hand path, which we won't worry about right now. Whatever that means, that's the sort of direction of the occult thinking that he identifies with. So Satan is a personification. Why Satan? Because for the most part, what LaVey is going to celebrate as a religious person are many of the things that are identified by Christians as being sin, like indulgence of the flesh, like revenge, like, if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, smash him on the other also, which is a quote from the Satanic Bible. Be good to those who are good to you. But you don't have to worry about your enemies. In fact, you want to defeat your enemies, is what he would say. So these kind of things that traditionally Christianity is always marginalized and then identified as sin, and of course Satan is the arch sinner in Christian thinking, then his thinking is, okay, well, if that's what, if what I am all about is what you guys call is attributed to Satan, then I guess I am, technically speaking, a Satanist. That's what he means. Now, it's not always the case with all the Satanists in the world that they deny the existence of Satan. In fact, that's one of the differences between LaVey and Aquino, is Aquino actually believes there is a sentient being who has been mythologized and personified throughout history as Prometheus or Lucifer or Set. He thinks that that being actually exists, and that being actually appeared to him and called him to go and start the Temple of Set. So you can get that rest of that story from Aquino pretty easily. So according to LaVey, then, Satan represents opposition to all religions which serve to frustrate and condemn man for his natural instincts. That's what it is. But it's also religious. So LaVey asks himself this question: why not simply then call it humanism? Or as a philosopher might identify it as egoistic humanism. Egoistic meaning having to do with the I, with the self, and then hedonism, this coming from the Greek word for pleasure, meaning that life's purpose or the ultimate good is the seeking of pleasure. Then why not just call it that instead of draping it in this religion? Well, there are several reasons for that I'll get to specifically that LaVey says, but you also bear in mind this is an American phenomenon, and there's something. I'm not saying these were his motives, but it's just a fact that there are certain advantages to be gained for having an institution that is recognized by the U.S. government as religion. There are certain protections, I should say, that come into play for a religion that don't necessarily accrue to a business, or even for that matter, maybe other government institutions. So it's inscribed in our Constitution, in the very first amendment, which is part of what we call the Bill of Rights. Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion, means they can't set up a national church, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So it's at the very heart of of American identity that people have freedom of religious expression. So why not? But it's more than that for him. Humanism is not a religion. It is simply a way of life with no ceremony or dogma. So that's going to be significant for him there. Satanism has both ceremony and dogma. Dogma is necessary. It's one thing to accept something intellectually, but to accept the same thing emotionally, we'll see why emotionally, what he means by that, why that matters, is an entirely different matter. Dogma provides man with his much needed fantasy. Why does that matter? We'll see that in a moment. In fact, we'll get to the point where we'll see everything that I said we're going to see in a moment. And I'll just say all this stuff all at the same time. All right, then we'll be done. Keep putting all this stuff off that in a moment I'll say. It's also occult. Now, what does that mean? What does that word mean? The term occult should not be confused with the similar sounding English word cult. They don't mean the same thing. Occult comes from the Latin occultus, which means hidden or secret. Lots of religions and lots of other expressions could be subsumed under this broad category of occult. Some of these expressions may sound familiar. Things like mysticism. We said Satanism already. Zen Buddhism, paganism, the old religion, esoteric beliefs, Wicca, New Age, sorcery, New Thought, witchcraft, Taoism, Spiritism, shamanism, Hinduism, magic, and Eastern philosophy. Now, I want you to know, or at least I will say, and then you can trust me or do your own research to see if you agree, that though there are very important differences, what I want you to know is that I know there are very important differences. Satanism is not the same as witchcraft. In fact, I talk explicitly about the differences between those in my articles. But I do think, despite the differences, though there are very important differences among these belief systems, there's a very important common ground which make them all properly called occult. So it's equivalent in a way to what Christians have when we talk about denominations. I mean, it's not strictly parallel, but you get the idea. You say, well, you got Baptist and Methodist and Catholic and Protestant and Orthodox and, you know, and all. And so historically, you would say, well, there are important differences between these groups, but historically are even more significant ideologically or philosophically or theologically. There's some kind of common core that allow us all to refer to them as Christian, okay? Even though the differences are not trivial necessarily. It's a similar thing with the occult. The differences are not trivial, but at the same time, the similarities are there. So each of these groups holds some basic ideas that they regard as secret or hidden from the general population. Depending on which occultist you read, whether it's the people like Gerald Gardner or Raymond Buckland in witchcraft, or Isaac Bonewitz in magic, or others that I could name, Margot Adler, and others. Depending on who you read, they have a different maybe understanding of, well, exactly why is this more or less escape the general population? And we can talk about that maybe during the Q&A if someone has a question. Well, what are their explanations of why it's secret or hidden? Is somebody keeping it secret, or is there something else going on? But whatever it is, there are these basic ideas that generally escape, in the occultist opinion, the attention, if you will, of the rank and file human being in the world, especially in Western cultures. What are those basic ideas? There's basic views about the nature of reality. And I'm going to show you how all of these are connected to Anton LaVey and the Satanic Bible. They're also connected to every one of those other groups, which is what I do in my world religions class and my class on new religious movements, is just to show. Now, by the way, nothing I'm saying here yet, and maybe even until we get to Q&A, is an argument that it's false. I mean, I certainly believe that these ideas are false, like spiritual law, but I'm not making an argument to that effect yet, and can't really in this time together. I'm just trying to get us to see the differences. So if you're a Satanist, or you're sympathetic, or you're on the fence, or you're just not a Christian at all, I don't want you to think that I think that having highlighted the differences, I've made my case. We all know Christianity is true. Everybody needs to now, drop to their knees before the Lord Jesus Christ. That's not at all what I think I'm doing. I'm just trying to show you so that, especially as Christians, people can understand, well, what do these people actually believe? And then make an informed judgment about whether they think it's true or false, given the arguments. You need arguments for assertions, not just the assertions. So what is a spiritual law? Spiritual law is the notion that the spiritual or non-physical realm operates according to laws or regularities like the physical realm does. So much of occult practice is mastering these, quote, laws in order to manipulate the spiritual realm to get physical results. It's often referred to as magic. LaVey says it this way: magic is the change in situations or events in accordance with one's will, which would, using normally accepted methods, be unchangeable. Well, what are normally accepted methods? We would probably identify those as the procedures of the natural sciences, chemistry and physics and these kind of things. They change things in the physical world, but LaVey is suggesting there are ways to manipulate the world around you by appealing to certain types of regularities or laws of the non-physical realm, if you will. So magic is never totally scientifically explainable. Why? Because it's, in his view, touching on some aspect of reality that falls beyond, in so many words, the mere physical realm, even though it has physical manifestations. All right. So I've got other quotes from LaVey, but for the sake of time, I want to press on. But you can get those from the slide deck. And I think that this, by the way, just so I will feel good about myself, I think this is a false view of reality. I just think that it is. I think that cause and effect thing is fine for the physical, natural world, but it's not true about the non-physical world. But I can't tonight make an argument to that effect, but I do think one of the problems as a Christian that I have with Satanism in particular, but the occult in general, is I think it's employing a false view of the nature of reality. That argument has to go back to the sound reason category. That's not an argument I would necessarily make exegetically or theologically. Well, I might make some of it theologically, but I wouldn't make it exegetically from a verse of the Bible. Another element of occult philosophy is this idea of a force, some kind of power that you can tap into. Again, LaVey says in the Satanic Bible, he says, it's talking about the ritual. Its main function is to isolate the otherwise dissipated adrenal and other emotionally induced energy and convert it into a dynamically transmittable force. It is purely an emotional rather than intellectual act. That's where the emotion and that's where the ritual and the ceremony and the dogma come in. There are lots of different ways that LaVey and many occultists think you can stimulate this force. And a lot of those ways for many occultists, in fact, probably for most of them, but certainly a lot of them, is internal states of mind like sexual lust, anger, intense love, intense grief, these kinds of feelings. And so the ritual tries to generate those emotions which agitate this force, and you're able by ritual and other constraints focus it, and it goes out and does destruction ritual or other kinds of ritual to try to manipulate the world. In fact, if you read a book, certainly the Satanic Rituals, or you read Raymond Buckland's Complete Book of Witchcraft, or Janet and Stuart Farah as a husband and wife witchcraft team. When you read this material, a lot of the material are, this is my term, recipes. They're rituals to get different effects. Just like you would go in the kitchen, say you put this with this, cook it at this for this length of time, you get a muffin, or you get a cookie, or you get a roll, or you get a bread, or whatever. Well, it's a similar kind of thing. And so LaVey acknowledges that there are lots of occult traditions from which one can cull, all of which are playing in this force. Satanic rituals, a blend of Gnostic, Kabbalistic. Gnostic would basically be a Christian form of occult thinking. It's occultism in the context of Christianity. Kabbalistic would be occultism in the context of Judaism. And Sufism would be occultic thinking in the context of Islam. So each of the three major world monotheistic religions have sort of an occult expression. Hermetic and Masonic elements incorporating nomenclature and vibratory words of power from every mythos. All right, so that's what's going on in there. And then the last element of this occult view of reality, and I argue in my New Religious Movements class, which, by the way, you can take, a shameless plug for Southern Evangelical Seminary. All right, they might edit this out of the archive version of this film, going, get that product placement out of there. This guy shamelessly plugging his seminary. But the last element then is human divinity. That there is an important sense that human beings are divine. Now, no occultist that I've ever read, with the exception maybe of Scientology, I can't off the top of my head think of any occultist that by human divinity they mean that the human being is some omnipotent, eternal, timeless, spaceless creator of the universe. That's a monotheistic understanding, which they don't believe is even true. What they mean is something else about the sacredness and the sort of source of one's destiny and values that come ultimately from oneself. It's individualistic for the most part. So again, the Satanic Bible says it this way. Anyone who pretends to be interested in magic or the occult for reasons other than gaining personal power is the worst kind of hypocrite. So that and other things we could look at are either explicit or tacit claims to one's own divinity, because they're saying, I am the captain of my own fate as an individual. I'm responsible for myself. I don't have to swear allegiance to any being, especially a God, outside of me necessarily. I'm the arbiter of my own values, and I set the course of my own life, and I take responsibility for that. And that's what LaVey celebrated. And he saw it in contradistinction to what he thought was this sort of herd mentality that plagued institutionalized Christianity in the 50s and 60s in which he grew up. And by the way, I think a lot of the things he would have criticized the American Christian church with, I would concur with that criticism. And probably every Christian, at least the ones that I know that are here tonight and associated with rational Christian, would also go, well, he's exactly right. That was one of the things that was wrong with Christianity. And we regret that over the years Christians have done these things. But that has nothing to do necessarily with the truth or falsity of the Christian claim, any more than because Richard Ramirez, the serial killer in the United States, who was convicted of murder, he murdered a lot of people. He was finally caught. And when he was sentenced in court and he held up his hand with the inverted pentagram on his palm tattooed and yelled out, "Hail Satan," that doesn't prove that Satanism is false. In fact, it doesn't necessarily say anything about the South African Satanists. They're not, as far as I can tell so far, they're not running around serial killing and things like Richard Ramirez was. So everybody's got their dirty laundry, and we all regret that. So both sides of this debate needs to make sure that we don't just air the dirty laundry when it's irrelevant. Now, if it's relevant, that's a different thing. But if it's not relevant to the truth or falsity, then be careful. All right. Now, another element of the profile, besides it being religious and being occult, is that it's hedonistic. I've already alluded to that. LaVey says it this way: the 7 deadly sins of the Christian church are greed, pride, envy, anger, gluttony, lust, and sloth. Satanism advocates indulging in each of these sins as they all lead to physical, mental, or emotional gratification. All right, so that's the profile. Now, let me let you in on some stuff that I think is not widely known unless people spend time actually studying Satanism, particularly LaVeyan Satanism, because there are others like the Temple of Set and others that I think a lot of people, even people that may read the Satanic Bible, might not know. Now, some of these are things that I'm throwing out as facts, but some of them may need a little bit more massaging for somebody to agree with me that is a fact. Just like, again, as I said earlier, if I just said, well, it's a fact that there's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as revealed in the Christian scriptures, the Bible, and took on the form of a man in the person of Jesus of Nazareth. I think those are all facts, but just me stating it as a fact is not a proof that it's true or that I'm right. The onus is on me on occasion to give my arguments and evidence for that, which obviously, well, actually, that's what Ratio Christi is all about, is how you know. So if this is your first exposure to Ratio Christi, even if you're a Satanist, you would be welcome at their meetings for productive conversation as fellow human beings. All right, so I can assure you, because I know the leadership of the Ratio Christis, not only there in the Pretoria area, of course, we're all doing Zoom right now, but also in Potchefstroom, also down in Stellenbosch, also at Rhodes, also at Nelson Mandela. I've been to all these campuses. I've spoken on all these campuses. I know the leadership. Also at KwaZulu-Natal, University of KwaZulu-Natal in Pietermaritzburg. I know the leadership, and I can tell you, you would be welcome. You would be welcome, and you would be welcome with your questions and challenges. That's why Ratio Christi exists. Okay, so I'm compensating for my plug of the seminary by plugging Ratio Christi. So maybe they'll let me come back now. Okay, so what I have in the slide deck is a whole series of legend versus reality of Anton LaVey and the Church of Satan. Okay, so I'll just let you go and decide whether you think, how that was a stupid resource, or here's how we know that that's actually what you call a legend is actually true. That's fine. I mean, I'd love to hear from you if you can correct me. But from the research that I've done, this is where I stand. I'm not going to go through these for the sake of time. I'll let you get those, except I'm going to pick two out, one of which is sort of trivial, and the other, which I think is more substantive. My main resource is the Rolling Stone magazine interview that Anton LaVey did. It's Not Easy Being Evil in a World That's Gone to Hell. In fact, I have that Rolling Stone magazine. The cover is a little defaced when I bought it, but there that is. So that what you see there on the screen is I have the actual article myself. So what are some of these legend versus reality? Well, according to the investigative journalism of the Rolling Stone, which, by the way, was the very first thing I ever read in years of reading both Satanists themselves as well as critics of Satanism. It was the first time I ever saw a journalist seemingly or evident that they actually did research to say, is that true? And they go, blah, 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 bracket, editorial note. We contacted this organization to see if this, we went to this, and they did all this investigative journalism, which is dying in the U.S., by the way, of really, really hound dog, as we would say, kind of journalism, sniffing out. But here's a couple of the second one being more substantive. His name originally on his birth certificate is not Anton Zandor LaVey. It's actually Howard Stanton LaVey. Now, Christians might laugh at that. Okay, so I'll apologize in advance to any Satanists who might be watching me. It's not fair in a way to make fun, but we sort of would laugh among ourselves to say, Howard just doesn't have that satanic zing to it like Anton does. I mean, how disappointed would Christians be if it turns out Jesus' name was Howard the Christ? We would probably go, oh, that sounds kind of goofy. We worship Howard Christ. It just doesn't sound right? I'm being sort of self-deprecating and trying to say we would feel the same way. And you think, okay, so who cares what his real name was? Whatever. But here's a more substantive, because what is broadly believed is that Anton LaVey wrote the Satanic Bible. For the most part, that is not true. He did not write. Now, that doesn't make it false, okay? But you need to know that he didn't write it. Much of the Satanic Bible was plagiarized from an 1896 work, Might is Right, by Ragnar Redbeard. Now Ragnar Redbeard was a pseudonym. Some people believe the real writer was Arthur Desmond. Others have had Jack London. There have been people. It was written anonymously for reasons that will become very evident here in a moment. So there's one cover you might see. There is another cover of Might is Right. There is Might is Right. Notice the subtitle, by the way, or Survival of the Fittest. Here's another cover. In fact, here is my own copy of Might is Right that I have here. So when I first was alerted to the fact that the Satanic Bible had a lot of plagiarism from Might is Right, I got a copy of Might is Right, and I chased down every accusation, may be unfair or too strong a term, but at least every allegation that there was, hey, this was plagiarized from Might is Right. I went through every one of them and put them in this PowerPoint, which I'm not going to do for you except pick out a couple of revealing examples. So I'll let you, that's why I want you to get the slide deck so you can decide for yourself and whether you think that matters or not. Because I can tell you it was passed off for decades as being something that he wrote, and that this is their guidebook, if you will, for what they believe. Again, I'm not arguing that because it's plagiarized it's necessarily false, but I think it nevertheless is part of the argument overall, at least it's relevant. So let me give you a couple of examples where, and you decide whether you think Now, Might is Right, remember, is written in the late 19th century. All right. For example, they're there on the left. In this arid wilderness of steel and stone, I raise my voice that you may hear. To the east and to the west, I beckon. To the north and the south, I show a sign proclaiming death to the weakling, wealth to the strong. That's your survival of the fittest mentality. Now, I have trouble reconciling that with other things I've heard Satanists claim, where we cherish all life, and the arguments they give. This is why we would never do the sacrifices that we're accused of doing of humans, which I agree. I don't think they do human sacrifices, babies or otherwise. But their argument for that is, well, we hold all life to be sacred. They don't use the word sacred necessarily, but valuable or whatever. I have trouble believing that that's really true at the same time that you swear death to weaklings, which, humanly speaking, weaklings would be handicapped and these kind of things. I'm not accusing the Satanists, especially the Satanists there that might be listening to me, that they have a reckless disregard for a helpless person around them. But that's what the book says. Death to the weakling, wealth to the strong. Open your eyes that you may hear, O men of mildewed minds, and listen to me, you laborious millions. For I stand forth to challenge the wisdom of the world, to interrogate the laws of man and God. I request reasons for your golden rule, which, by the way, that's what Ratio Christi is all about. That's where you get the reasons. And ask the why and wherefore of your 10 commands. That's where you could find out what some of these whys and wherefores of the 10 commands and the whole Bible, for that matter. Before none of your printed idols, that's a Bible, by the way, do I bend in acquiescence, and he who saith, thou shalt, to me is my mortal foe. All right, now I'm not going to read all of these to you. I just wanted to read that one so you'd get the feel. Now, what does Might is Right say? In this arid wilderness of steel and stone, I raise my voice that you may hear. To the east and to the west, I beckon. To the word for word. And I've got quote after quote, section after section after section after section after section of the Satanic Bible just being lifted right out of. Now, there's nothing illegal about that, by the way, from everything I know. So maybe the word plagiarizes, I don't mean that as a legal expression. I don't think it's illegal because I think Might is Right is now what is known as public domain, that the copyright is expired. It hasn't passed on in the family. Nobody even knows who wrote it in the first place. So there's nothing illegal about it, but I think there's something unethical of lifting that out without any footnote, without any indication that it's not your own thinking, it's not your own philosophy. But there are a few instances, and this is what I wanted to, this is why I brought it up. There are a few instances where the Satanic Bible conspicuously doesn't give the same word for word from Might is Right. And these jumped out at me as an American. And you'll see why in a moment. Let me just give you a couple of quotes. Behold the crucifix. What does it symbolize? Pallid, incompetent. Well, this was just one more of the two. I'm sorry. I forgot I had two that were, just to give you an idea that they were word for word. Now, what about this? I dip my forefinger in the watery brow of your impotent mad Redeemer and write over his torn brow the true Prince of Evil, the King of the slaves. No hoary falsehood shall be a truth to me. No stifling dogma shall encamp my pen. Now look what the Might is Right says. I dip my forefinger in the watery blood of your impotent mad Redeemer, your divine Democrat, your Hebrew madman. And then it picks up. And right over, so you notice that part is left out. Why would that matter? I'll tell you my opinion. Because there was no way on earth that Avon Publishing Company was going to publish something that could be construed. This is the 60s, something that could be construed as anti-American explicitly, and even worse, anti-Semitic. We're in the 60s, much of the world, especially the Western world, including South Africa's contributions in defeating the Nazis, we're still reeling from the specter of Nazi fascism and the anti-Semitism there. So there's no way that an American publishing company is going to let that get past the editor. You can lift all you want out of this, Anton. There's no way in the world we're going to let you have that kind of stuff and bring that kind of persecution and accusations and if not lawsuits down on us here in the late 1960s of America. So you find several the Democrat there having to do with the principle of being a democratic republic, a representative democratic republic, as the United States government is. And there are several instances of that. Religions must be put to the question. No moral dogma must be taken for granted. No standard of measurement deified. There is nothing inherently sacred about moral codes. Religions and constitutions. What do you mean constitutions? No, there's no way we're going to cast a spur. Now, today it'd probably be an asset to vomit all over the Constitution, at least in the United States it would be. There's so much anti-American sentiment boiling in the United States now that now it's almost a badge of honor to throw up on the Constitution and the American flag and stuff. So if you haven't been watching international news, and I don't even know if it's international news, but it's pretty unstable right now in the U.S. in some quarters. All right, and maybe one more: theories and ideas that may have meant life and hope and freedom for ancestors now may mean destruction, slavery, and dishonor us. As environments change, no human ideal stand this sure. Theories and ideals and constitutions. Anyway, so you can get the rest of those. Let me pull this to a close. He passed away in 1997. The Church of Satan is still operating. The current leader is Peter Gilmore, who's the high priest. Blanche Barton is still associated with the church, from everything I know, who had written stuff about Anton LaVey. His work, which I don't have, which I haven't read, but I will add it to my quote wish list, as they say on Amazon, is the Satanic Scriptures by Peter Gilmore. But Peter also has a lot of stuff that are like blog entries, so you can get a lot of his thinking just from the website, the Church of Satan website. All right. Now, I think maybe I've said everything I wanted to say about satanic cults. So let me stop with that, and then I can stop sharing, and so you can, because you want to see me. You want to see more of me, Daniel. So, but I'm willing to entertain questions if that fits in the schedule here.
Yes, we have time for questions. Thanks very much, Richard. And yes, another promotion for SCS.
There's my shameless plug.
Well, you helped us out with Rashi Christie, so thanks for that. You can promote SCS all you want now.
Yeah, quid pro quo going on here.
Yeah. All right, so we have a question here. Aren't most of the accusations made against Satanism during the Satanic Panic projections from the American evangelical movement?
I'm not sure what the questioner may mean by the term projections, but I do think that they're false. I think they're at least false. My take is that I think a lot of what motivated people wanting to believe those stories was because, and this is true of it's a lot easier to get someone to reject a point of view that you reject if you can link it to something that violates their sensibilities or things you already know that they hold sacred. So rather than, because it's a lot harder to make an argument, an intellectual argument. Well, why do you think this is a false view of reality? Well, all of a sudden everybody like that. But if I could go, well, you realize old Billy Bob over there is cutting up babies. Oh, whoa. When you run, that's a lot easier argument to make. So I think, and it's salacious, and people love to tell about car wrecks and natural disasters and things. It's regrettable. But on the slide deck, you can get references to a number of investigative journalists by Christians who expose people like Mike Warnke, for example. The whole story Mike Warnke tells in his Satan Cellar is just not even true. And it was proven false by Christian investigative journalists. So I think it's false. Whether it's itself a projection of American evangelicalism, I'm not even sure what that means. American evangelicals weren't sacrificing babies either. So other than not maybe knowing exactly what they meant by that expression, I'd say it's false for the most part.
All right. Next question. Is narcissism a virtue of LaVeyan Satanism or LaVeyan Satanism? If so, how does this affect stuff like parenting where narcissism is objectively harmful?
So if you, there's a difference between perhaps narcissism and then a healthy sense of self-interest, right? So I think it's part of the way God has made human beings that we're inbred with a sort of a default self-interest, that when you see a lion, you try to get away and get into safety. You don't just have this reckless disregard. Well, what's a lion going to do? What's an arm between friends? He's going to bite my arms off. So self-interest, I don't think is. In fact, I would argue, which I argue in my written article, I don't really get into it in the presentation, that that even the pursuit of pleasure is actually compatible with a Christian view of reality. But there was a song that was popular decades ago in the United States in the country music genre called "Looking for Love in All the Wrong Places." And so what I disagree with Satanism is not the principle of seeking one's pleasure. It's what ought to constitute that pleasure. What actually does constitute human flourishing in the ultimate sense? That's what I would argue where I think the Satanist has it wrong. And then what kind of means are acceptable as a way of acquiring that pleasure? So I think for the most part, from my understanding of LaVey and Satanism, it wouldn't advocate hurting someone else to get one's own pleasure. You don't molest children if you're a child molester necessarily. You don't do that. First of all, that would be stupid, because even if you were trying to grab all the gusto and get all the pleasure out of life, even if that was your philosophy, it would be stupid to follow through on certain acts that would make you go to jail or get executed, because that's not very pleasurable. So even as a practical matter, that doesn't even make sense. People that do those kind of things are being overwhelmed by evil in a way in which I think we can demonstrate is false. So I don't attribute that to Satanism as such, even if individual Satanists, and for that matter, individual Christians, have indulged in these things. So, but if you mean by narcissism sort of a moral attitude where, as opposed to love your neighbor, then maybe that is something that's inconsistent within Satanism, at least the Satanism as I've read it. Death to the weakling, wealth to the strong, but then love your neighbor. Well, if your neighbor's a weakling, how can you death to him and then love him at the same time? So I think there is a sort of a tension at best, if not a contradiction at worst, between this idea of self-aggrandizement as a goal in life and then peaceful coexistence with your fellow human being.
All right. Just before I forget, though, Richard's been referring to articles a couple of times. We have also on the Ratio Christi website, we publish weekly informative articles on different topics. And so if I remember correctly, Richard's articles on witchcraft will probably appear on our website within maybe a month or two. So we will have that out on our website as well.
Thank you.
In a couple of weeks. Now, next question: can Dr. Howe expand on self-styled Satanism?
So self-styled Satanism basically are individual people who call themselves Satanists, irrespective of any association they may have with an organization like the Church of Satan. And from everything that I've researched over the decades, excuse me, I'm drinking coffee. From everything I've researched over the decades, the criminal activity that can be linked to, quote, Satanism are linked to these people who are individual, what I would call individual or self-styled Satanists. So people like Richard Ramirez, for example, who was an avowed, he called himself a Satanist. As I said, he had the pentagram on his palm. He yelled, "Hail Satan!" But he wasn't a member of an organization, and the Church of Satan would have gone, "We don't want this guy with us. He doesn't come to our meetings. He doesn't." Now he may even say that he reads the Satanic Bible. I don't know if he said that or not. Another one would be people like David Berkowitz, who was the son of Sam killer, another serial killer, who, by the way, became a Christian in prison. You can go to his website. His website. You have to Google David Berkowitz, but now he's no longer son of Sam, but son of God or something, son son of Christ. So it's a pretty cool story that he tells about his serial killing. He was another one that kind of was self-styled. One that was real famous was a guy named Sean Sellers, who murdered his parents and murdered a convenience store. And he explicitly did it in his mind in the name of Satan. Sort of like the meme you've seen, for the glory of Satan. I'm sure you've seen that meme all over the internet, the little cartoon. The little cartoon looks like a little bear, and it's like some Hiroshima bomb, and it says, for the glory of Satan. It's sort of mocking, I think, in a funny kind of way, what Christians may think about Satanism or Satan. So that, I think, is what the South African Satanists, the Church of Satan in South Africa, that's what matters to them, that the Christians don't misunderstand them about. Whatever else can be said about Richard Ramirez or David Berkowitz, or for that matter, Charles Manson or Sean Sellers, they're wanting you to not associate them with that. And any more than, we hear stories of Catholic priests who were child molesters. And Christians would regret anybody painting Christianity with that brush. So, well, look what these priests did. You go, well, we don't advocate that. It's not part of the Christian message. And now, if you want to say that, well, really, they're being consistent with the Christian message, make your argument. If we want to say, well, they may not be doing those things in their Church of Satan, but it's an inconsistency when they don't do them. If you want to make that argument, make the argument. And let that be the theater in which the discussion announces or proceeds, and not this idea of just hurling accusations. Not that anybody's done that. But I could tell from their constitution, and it's quite understandable, they wanted to correct misunderstandings that people may have based on the satanic panic, because that still may have a lingering impact on what comes to mind when they hear Church of Satan.
Okay. Here's another question. I do not believe the weaklings referred to was handicapped folks and people with ailments, etc., but rather those found to be lazy, for not taking charge of their realities. That is to say, weak-minded peeps. How does Dr. Howe understand the reference to weaklings?
Yeah, that's fine. I wouldn't quarrel with that. Ingrates and morons and idiots, they deserve what they get because they're weak-minded and such like that. Doesn't say that in the context, but I think that's actually true of LaVey, that he does think that about, he has a great one-liner out of The Devil's Notebook where he says, because I think I like this. You'd be a great signature for your email. Put that in your email, Anton LaVey, Church of Satan. He said, it's too bad stupidity isn't painful. And I laugh at that. Not that I'm not stupid sometimes, but I would be better off if stupidity was painful, I suppose. Maybe I'd get rid of some of my own stupidity. Yeah, I don't have a problem with that he wasn't necessarily advocating the dissolution of handicapped people. Let's throw them all in a meat grinder and such. But I do think he had contempt. He was an elitist, and he did have contempt for the rank and file moron that walked around, and which is different than a Christian point of view, where we would want to try to nurture people and bring them from the prison of their own shallow thinking into a more robust way of understanding life and the nature of reality, and rescue them from that. Well, LaVey is pretty much like, well, here's the rescue, and if you want to read it, fine. If you don't, get out of my way kind of attitude. And I go, well, that's different than the way we would approach it. Yeah.
All right. Is it fair to say that LaVey was a sensationalist who sought wealth and celebrity and intentionally employed Satan for these purposes?
I think there's no doubt. Yeah, I think there's no doubt that was a large element of it. I mean, after all, he didn't pick Set. Why? Because nobody's going to Set. Whoa, I can't believe you're a Setian. Nobody even knows who Set was in Egyptian mythology. Of course. In fact, this is another criticism that Michael Aquino, and I'll let you referee that debate between the two of them. But this is another problem he had with Satanism in his experience, and I'm talking as an American church, is that according to Aquino, and I wasn't there, this is just the debate, it finally deteriorated to where you could just buy a priesthood. You could just pay a due and become a priest in the Satanic Church and tout that as a credential. And so there was, in Aquino's mind, there was no serious attention to a philosophy of life. It was not intellectual at all. It was just sort of Mardi Gras and sensational and kind of macabre, and it was sort of tongue-in-cheek. It was a lampoon of the shallowness of institutionalized Christianity in the 50s and 60s in the United States. And so he trafficked in these things, and he did pretty well for himself. Not that he didn't believe some of the stuff that he went on to say in the Satanic Bible. There's every reason to think that he did think it, because he was teaching this stuff in his private, or I should say in his home, in Bible studies, not really, Satanic type Bible studies, in his home on Friday nights, before that got parlayed into a church. That's an interesting story. You can chase down some of the sources in the Rolling Stone article, and also some of the stuff that Zena LaVey, his daughter, says. So there's a big row between father-daughter of what she says. This is a lot of stuff that was going on. Now, does that mean then that the doctrines of the occult are false? No, not necessarily. But I think it's unfortunate that a lot of people get so caught up in all the trappings of Satanism as a church, and that where they could celebrate those views of the nature of reality and embrace them themselves without all of this, in my judgment, this is probably not fair, this sort of cheesy, kind of juvenile, let's hang an inverted pentagram on our wall and have a tattoo. At least in the States, that stuff very often is just a way, it's a sort of a juvenile way of really kind of scaring people around you and putting them off, and, oh, I'm a Satanist, you better. And they just go, no, just embrace a philosophy of life, make your case in the marketplace of ideas. If you think it's worthy of building a church around, fine. But the Satan part, you don't even believe in Satan. That's a Christian doctrine. Why would you even adopt a doctrine that you explicitly deny? Why would you? I mean, back to the original question. Why would he specifically pick something that looms prominently in the Christian view of reality to be their icon, and they don't even believe it? I think that says something about what's going on.
All right, thanks, Richard. Let me just see here. Here's another question. Does pursue pleasure mean go for what you like, or more like Epicurean, stay away from what makes you uncomfortable?
Well, I guess it depends on whether you're a Stoic or an Epicurean. So the Epicureans are often accused of being grab all the gusto and feel as good as you can. They were really more interested in a sort of a even keel of life. So you don't get drunk on Friday night, not because you don't like being drunk, but because you don't like being hungover Saturday morning. Whereas the rank hedonists would go, I'm going to get drunk right now, and I'll worry about how I feel later. The Epicurean was more. I think I've got them right. I may have them backwards between the Stoics and the Epicureans. Maybe it was the Stoics that were that way. So don't hold my feet to the fire if I've got them inverted. But the other point of view is more of a stasis, an even keel kind of thing. But I think philosophically, there's a lot to be said about the principle of human flourishing, what Aristotle calls arete, or happiness, and how that can figure in to a Christian view of reality. Because I think historically Christians have gotten, and it's our own fault, we've made it sound like that to be a Christian means to deprive oneself of one's humanity and pleasure. It doesn't necessarily mean that. It's just that Christians believe there is an eternal aspect to the equation. And so just as a child, you're taught by your parents to forego a short-term pleasure like eating your candy for a long-term, not only pleasure, eating your food, but also something that's good for you, eating supper. And we learn that lesson as a child. By parallel, Christians think that that's actually true of all of the human experience, including the next life. Now, is there a next life? That's part of what we would have to argue but that's what we mean. We're saying hey, I might need to give up candy right now in order to be healthy in the next life, just by analogy. That's what we're saying. So we get a bad reputation. Us Christians don't even believe you can eat candy. Again, this is an analogy. They don't even believe that you can enjoy the pleasures of life of God. It's not that we necessarily think that. It's just that on certain occasions, the pursuit of certain pleasures in this life may be detrimental to our happiness and pleasure in the next life. Again, we have to make our argument for that, but that's what we're trying to say. So there, in fact, I in my article, Satanism, a taste for the dark side, I think in the journal article, I go into this whole idea of the seeking of pleasure and why that's not in principle, I think, wrong, and certainly not unchristian. And you can just deal with the specifics there in the article. It's looking for love in all the wrong places is what I think it is. It's eating your candy and forgetting how good the food is.
All right. Here's another question, Richard. Thank you for your objective view on Satanism. As a member of the South African Satanic Church, I find our biggest difficulty is often opening up a dialogue with Christians. How would you suggest going about that?
That is a great question. And what I have come to celebrate in the past number of years, both as a student and then as a professor, is the increasing number of Christians who share the same desire of. In fact, I warn non-Christian friends of mine. I go, look, you should know that Christians always sort of have these ulterior motives in a way. I mean, I'm trying to be transparent. We think that there is eternal happiness to be had and eternal misery to be had. That's what we think. And so at least understand our motivation, that we think embracing salvation in Christ is the only means of securing eternal flourishing and happiness, unending, and avoiding unending misery. That's our motivation. So, of course, we desire every opportunity to have meaningful, productive dialogue because we want to make our case, because we think we can demonstrate that it's true. We think we have the argument and the evidence. And just like a Satanist would be exasperated if they heard somebody who misunderstood the Satanism and cast aspersions on it and it was things that's not even what we believe, or that's not even why we believe it. We do the same thing as Christians. So we desire the same thing. So Ratio Christi is an excellent venue. Now, if you're not a student, you might say, well, it's not really open to me, but they can point you to other resources that are directed towards other communities besides the university campus. And by the way, the direction to the campus is not just students, it's also faculty. So if you're associated with faculty in any of the universities, there's a Ratio Christi dimension that's faculty oriented as well, not just student oriented. They're both. So talk to some of the leadership, like Dr. Moritz, soon to be Dr. Moritz here. Maybe before we get off tonight. No, not quite that soon, but pretty soon. And they can point you to some resources, and I already said, I know you would be welcome at any Ratio Christi meeting, of course, the Zoom and these kind of things. I can't say you would necessarily be welcome at any given church, because churches run a spectrum, all right? At least I'm speaking as an American. I know some churches, as a Christian, I would feel uncomfortable going to just because I'm a stranger. They would look at you like, how did he find out where we meet? So you get that kind of feeling, because it becomes cliquish or whatever. So what I would do there is ask some of the leadership here tonight, get email exchanges and say, do you know of a Christian church that I could go visit and just hear and meet Christians? And then I would like to think, now I don't live in South Africa. I've been there 6 times. Can't wait to get back. But I would like to think that there would be some types of meetings that the Church of Satan in South Africa would invite Christians to just go to. Here, I'll tell you how I know this is true of the Christian, because almost every university campus I've been on, especially in the United States, because they've been around a little bit longer, the Ratio Christi meetings that go on has a strong contingency of non-Christians, including atheists, that come to it. Almost every meeting. And the Christians go to the atheist groups, and their friends, they go out to eat after the meetings and still talk, that's the key. The most we can do, make our case, and if we want the freedom, liberty to decide what we think is true, we afford that same freedom to other people. If they decide Christianity is not true, and I've made my case, I still want to be friends. I'll still be annoying you with my case, but that's as far as it goes.
All right, thanks, Richard. On that point, maybe just before I forget, so yeah, I want to encourage. Let me just get. I think the name here is Michael. Michael, I want to encourage Michael. Just go to our website, www.rashukristi.co.za. You'll find the contact details us, and you can really take the liberty to contact us. We are situated, as Richard already mentioned, in Pretoria, Stellenbosch, Potchefstroom, Pietermaritzburg, and we've also had events in Port Elizabeth and in Grahamstown as well. But the point is, please reach out to us, and we would love to engage and love to have some conversations on this point. So thank you very much, Richard. I want to be respectful of your time, so I have one more question, if that's fine.
Okay. All right.
Here is the question. What are the 9 satanic statements? Clarify then what Satan really is and represents. I'm struggling to make sense of the second part of this question. Clarify them, what Satan really is and represents.
So I think it can be summarized very, very simply as, at least as Anton LaVey understood it, that the purpose of life. In fact, I have in the full version of this presentation, I have video of Anton LaVey explaining things, which we couldn't, for the sake of time, I didn't want to do here, but they're easily accessible probably through various venues. But at any rate, but the purpose that he was trying to push forward was there needed to be a religion that embraced the natural tendencies of people to seek their own personal gratification, physical, mental, emotional, instead of suppress that. You want to have sex with somebody, and they're willing to be have sex back to you as adults, then that's just between the two. It's nobody else's business. Doesn't matter if you're both men, you're both women, or whatever. You don't rape anybody, right? But consenting adult, if you want to just whatever kind of lifestyle you want to live that doesn't necessarily hurt anybody else and is not illegal, then that's just your business. And you don't need to be associated with some church that keeps telling you that you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't do that. He takes that as this form of oppression that has plagued Western culture in his mind for almost 2,000 years. And he's trying to give some venue that people can liberate themselves from. Now, it's that with one other ingredient, and that is learn how to access these occult forces and powers. And that can even be better. I mean, sort of the non-physical equivalent to learning how to lift weights and learn skills in electricity so you can really make your house, and plumbing, and you can do everything in technology. You can spiritually learn all these techniques and access these forces in order to advance your own agenda for your self-aggrandizement, seeking power, to live life till its fullest. Once you're dead, you take a dirt nap. There is no life after death except in some. It's sort of inconsistent in the Satanic Bible. It depends on which part of it you take as him being metaphorical and which part you take to be literal. But it seems to me that you only live on in some sense of in the memories of people who come after you, so to speak, in the sinews, he says, in the brains of people who follow you. So there's no afterlife to worry about. So as Richard Dawkins says, the same kind of philosophy. There probably is no God, so get on with your life and just forget trying to worry about the next life. Well, if there is a next life, I think that would be an important thing for people to factor into the equation. What's the arguments for the next life? That's what Christians are trying to seek opportunities, at least some of us, to actually make that case. We're trying to convince people, just like we're all floating down a river and there's a huge waterfall and we're all going to perish if we don't learn how to get out of the boat and swim to shore. If you really think there's this fatal waterfall facing you, then you're going to do everything you can to convince people to jump out of the boat. Even if they laugh and mock and all that, you go, this is my argument. jump out of the boat, get to the shore, save yourself, so to speak. That's what we're all about.
All right, Richard, I'm gonna stop here with that question. I just want to thank our listeners this evening. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for tuning in. And don't forget about our event next week as well. So same time, same place via Zoom. But listen, Richard, thank you very much for once again helping us out with our ministry efforts here in South Africa. Thank you for your research and thank you for your work. And just thank you for all your friendship over the years as well. It's just mean a lot to the leadership here in South Africa, and we appreciate you and Rebecca very much.
Absolutely. And the leadership here knows how to get in touch with me if there's anything I can do for anybody. They know how to pass contact along. So it's an honor to be here tonight. So thank you so much.
All right, cool. Well, that's all for tonight. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a nice evening further.